We did have a positioning problem where I continued to float out of the stirrups and did not have freedom of both hands for any continued length of time. This is why, let me say this, as a result, I had to work continually against a pressure suit, against the stiffness of the suit, and this work then had to be taken out through the environmental control system. About the time that I got here into the area and started working, connecting some hooks on a tether, the sun was just about to go down, and Tom, being in the front of the spacecraft, was almost in total darkness, and I was in total sunlight. And I immediately got very warm on the back, and I'll explain this in a minute, but I got extremely hot on the back, as a matter of fact, in the small of the back area. We stopped and took a rest until the sun went down, and then we continued on with some of our task of operating and donning the AMU. About this time is when my visor started fogging up. Because I had put in so much extra work in just maintaining position, I began now to overload, apparently, the capability of the chest pack.
Gemini 10, an astronaut John Young describes a propulsion system burn which pushed the spacecraft to a new world's altitude record. Young is heard describing a film shown at a post-flight conference. The date is August 1st, 1966.
Now we show us coming up on Hawaii for the first primary propulsion system burn. Mike threw the switch, and a minute and 24 seconds later, boy, it was really something. We had a -1 G, and we were driven forward in the cockpit, and for 11 seconds, we got a tremendous thrill. The colors are just beautiful. And here we are, on our way to apogee, and to a new world's altitude record. And I might say that it was set incidental to doing our job, of which I'm extremely proud.
In the following, Gemini 10 astronaut Michael Collins comments on extravehicular activity during his flight. The comment was made during a post-flight conference in Houston, August 1, 1966.
A considerable portion of your attention must be devoted to holding your body in a position which is temporarily advantageous for the type of work you're doing in. And I think this is the basic problem in EVA. Without some sort of handholds or restraining devices, a large percentage of the astronaut's time is going to be devoted to torquing his body around until it's in the proper position to do some useful work. And in this process of torquing your body around, you usually find that you overshoot and bounce back, and you sort of sway back and forth and rotate around in the proximity of your job site, but it's extremely difficult to damp out all emotions and to hold yourself motionless. Really, I found I was never absolutely motionless in trying to perform a task, that I was constantly moving back and forth in front of and across the particular job site that I was interested in.
Following is a statement by NASA's Deputy Administrator, Dr. Robert Siemens. He speaks of accomplishments during the Gemini flights, and particularly of the just concluded Gemini 10 mission. The comments were made August 1, 1966.
Gemini has done much more to open the way to the moon than we could have hoped for 5 years ago, and has given this country an operational spacecraft important to national defense. With Gemini, we've developed our ability to maneuver in space, to change orbits, to inspect other objects in space, to rendezvous and dock, and to use the power of an orbiting rocket as a switch engine in space. Gemini has supported men in space in good health for twice as long as it takes to get to the moon and back. And Gemini has brought the astronauts safely and precisely to Earth whenever required under both normal and emergency conditions. Gemini has enabled the astronauts themselves to demonstrate their ability to function effectively in and out of their spacecraft, and to serve as test pilots in a variety of new space operations, and to attend to significant scientific and technological experiments. In the mission we're going to look at more closely today, the astronauts proved their skill in carrying out two rendezvous maneuvers. In the second, when they converged on the Agena left from Gemini 8, they tracked optically without the assistance of radar. They used the Agena as a switch engine to travel further into space than man has to date. And they collected a micrometeorite experiment from Agena 8 that had been exposed to the space environment since last March. This required Major Collins to operate outside the spacecraft a second time. Gemini has demonstrated the feasibility of almost everything we plan to do in Apollo, except land softly on the moon and return safely through the Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour. Saturn V is required to inject Apollo into the atmosphere at such speeds. But in parallel programs, the Project Fire test and the first Apollo flight with the advanced Saturn I have already gone a long way toward proving the design of the Apollo heat shield. And Surveyor has demonstrated techniques for a soft landing on the moon and for effective operation from the lunar surface. Perhaps most important of all, in 8 manned Gemini flights and 2 more to come, we're amassing a great wealth of operating experience and operating skills. It would be difficult to overstate what it means to the American space effort to be starting the Apollo program with Gemini experience already available to us. We will open the manned flight phase of the Apollo program with a seasoned team with lettermen at key positions.
Gemini 11, and astronaut Richard Gordon speaks of his extravehicular activity and its problems. The date is September 26, 1966, at a post-flight conference in Houston.
Here's the most frustrating experience in the world, and this is trying to put that clamp on. And you can see the way my right hand is going, that I had a great deal of difficulty in stabilizing it so I could get a little bit of friction on it. Every time I'd tighten it down and turn loose of it to get a new purchase on it, I'd bump it or hit it and it would just spin on the docking bar. Then I'd have to stop it and put it in the right position. The position had to be fixed so that Pete and I both could see the status display panel on the Agena for the burn. So it had to be precisely in place before it could be locked down. And all I'm doing there is batting that thing around the docking bar. Once I got a little bit of friction on this clamp, it could hold it in place, I actually let go of my feet and actually floated and held on with both hands and finished clamping it down. This essentially completed the attachment of that tether.
Honors for the crew of Gemini 11. In the following, NASA Administrator James Webb presents the Exceptional Service Medal to astronaut Charles Conrad, September 1966.
This citation reads, "The National Aeronautics and Space Administration awards to Charles Conrad, Jr. the NASA Exceptional Service Medal for outstanding contributions to space flight and engineering as command pilot of Gemini 11. He executed for the first time orbital maneuvers to rendezvous and dock with an Agena in less than 1 orbit, and then using the Agena rocket reached a new altitude record of 850 miles. He performed the first tethered station-keeping exercise in which artificial gravity was produced and participated in the first closed-loop controlled reentry. This performance has greatly increased man's knowledge of space flight."
Next, Gemini 11 astronaut Richard Gordon is presented the Exceptional Service Medal. The speaker is NASA Administrator James Webb.
This citation reads, "The National Aeronautics and Space Administration awards to Richard F. Gordon, Jr. the NASA Exceptional Service Medal for outstanding contributions to space flight and engineering as pilot of Gemini 11, which for the first time docked with an Agena on the first orbit and then, using an Agena rocket, reached a new altitude record of 850 miles. He performed 2 periods of extravehicular activity, which included attaching a tether to the Agena and retrieving a nuclear emulsion experiment package. He assisted with the first tethered station-keeping exercise in which artificial gravity was produced and participated in the first closed-loop controlled reentry. This performance has greatly increased man's knowledge of space flight."
Gemini 12, the last of the Gemini series. Astronaut James Lovell describes, at a press conference, his problems with radar. The date, November 23, 1966.
we were getting set for our final maneuver down at the terminal phase initiations for the final rendezvous, when Buzz noticed that the computer wasn't giving any change of range. And I had looked down at the little green light that tells us that we have a radar lock on, and it was off. And for a minute there, both of us just looked at each other. We said, oh no, it can't happen to us. Anybody else or any other time, but gee, not this time. But suddenly it dawned on us that sure enough, our radar had indeed failed. And we went to the radar backup procedures, which we had practiced quite a bit in our pre-flight training, but really never expected to use. The first thing on my list, it said, acquire the target visually. And I looked up there, and I couldn't see a thing. Buzz took out his trusty sextant, which had an 8-power scope, and put it up to the window and spotted the target. And I looked up again, and that speck on the windshield turned out to be the Agena. So we bore-sighted on the target, and the rest of the rendezvous is more or less history. It was successful. And now I'm sort of glad that we had a radar failure, because it gave us an opportunity to use the backup charts that all the crews have been practicing quite a bit, but have not really utilized.
In the following, Gemini 12 astronaut James Lovell describes the solar eclipse witnessed during the flight of November 1966.
I had on my side a very almost opaque gold filter, which I could see the round circle of the sun, and it was my job to track the sun through this filter as we came up to the eclipse. Just as the time was approaching, I could see the moon, which was a dark disk, come across the limb of the sun and start to occult it. I thought at first that we were really going to miss it, because it appeared that the moon was a little bit lower than the sun and that we would never get a total eclipse. But as we approached this position and we approached the time of totality, suddenly the complete window became black, and in an impulse I ripped off the filter and looked out, and I could see a black disk against a sort of a black sky with a brilliant ring around it of the corona of the sun. And just for a few seconds I took a look at the total eclipse, and I knew that we had indeed completed the rendezvous. Shortly thereafter I put the filter back on, and soon this very brilliant sphere of the sun shining through from the other side of the moon had taken place. It was quite a beautiful sight.
In the following, astronaut Edwin Aldrin comments on the Gemini 12 experience with extravehicular activity. The comments were made during a post-flight press conference during November 1966.
To summarize what the lessons of what I think we learned from our EVA on this flight, first I think we learned the great value of a restraint system. In order to perform a task in EVA, we first must take the time to set up a restraint to the body that will substitute for the 1G that we have down here where our feet are in contact with the ground. We have to fix the body in a position where we can then devote our entire efforts to the task at hand. The second lesson that I think we learned concerns the value of the underwater training that we had. This was extremely valuable to us in letting us go through the entire timeline of the EVA mission. The third lesson that I think we learned was that sincere and intense training and very close attention to equipment familiarization really pays off in these type of efforts, and there's just no substitute for very close training.
Following is a statement of the Gemini flight program by Dr. Robert Gilruth, director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, Houston. The statement came at the conclusion of the Gemini 12 flight, and Dr. Gilruth compliments astronauts Lovell and Aldrin.
Of the 10 Gemini manned flights, each one, in its own special way, has added new knowledge and has helped pave the way for the next. Each time, it has seemed most difficult to surpass the previous performance, yet each time it has been done. I have been well aware of the high standards of skill, devotion, and courage required of each crew member in this series of pioneering flights. I've been thankful, as have all of you, for the successful completion of each mission. For Captain Lovell, this is his second space flight. For Colonel Aldrin, it's his first. Both men are worthy of the anchor positions they have played as pilots in this last of the Gemini series, Gemini 12.